Well, good evening, everybody. It's time for our Facebook Live study of the book of Revelations. I've noticed that whenever we go live on my phone, it's kind of like the phone sits there and buzzes just a little bit. Well, it's live, and so I'm not waiting for it to buzz tonight. I'm just going. It's good to get started on our study. I have a new phone, by the way. My old phone had gotten so some nights it would tell me I was out of storage before I got through the Facebook Live study, and other things were happening, and so I got a new iPhone 12, and man, this thing's got plenty of storage, so not to worry about running out. Hope you all have had a good day. It's been a beautiful day, and it sounds like we are in for another nice day tomorrow. Maybe a little bit of rain tomorrow evening. I see Tommy Sutherland just came on. Greg and Carol are on. John Ellis is watching. Good to have you, John. Pat Caldwell, a friend of mine from TVA and a member of Christ Church, just messaged the church 3 or 4 minutes ago asking, how do you get on the Bible study? And I responded back telling him, so Pat, I hope you're able to get on and be here with us. Had somebody today make me feel good. He was telling me he really enjoys the Bible study, and yet he doesn't have Facebook Live. What he does is wait until after the study is finished, and then he hits it on the Christ Church app. Jessica's really good, and Susan to get it on our app and get it on our website, and that makes it available to people who don't do social media and Facebook. Okay, Pat's on. Good to see you, Pat. Appreciate that. Becky just got a phone call and ran out of the room. She'll be back in a little bit. Let's get into our study tonight. We're in the 4th week of this study of the book of Revelation. It's a book of apocalyptic writing, and it comes as the last book in the New Testament. We read about the 7 seals being opened, and each time a seal is opened up, the scroll is, when a seal is broken, the scroll is opened a bit more, and then another seal is broken, and so that's how the revelation is taking place. That's included on the scroll of the one who was sitting on the throne. It's the Lamb, Christ, who's actually able to break the seals. Some things are happening, we would say current events happening in the time that the Revelation was written, and those current events are so very important to the meaning and understanding what John is getting at. The Roman Empire, at the time that this Revelation happened and was written, just seems infinite. It seems like the power of the Roman Empire will never end, and it's superior to any other force, it seems like, in the world. The Roman emperors had become very self-centered, starting with Nero. Then there was a bit of a relaxation, and now that Domitian is the emperor, they are insisting on some things. What's Domitian requiring that all subjects do? We've talked about this a little bit before. Go ahead and put a comment in to tell me what is it that the Emperor Domitian is requiring subjects all over the Roman Empire to do. Oh yeah, he's requiring people around the empire to worship him, and he will put out images so that when he is not present, people worship his image. He likes to call himself Lord and God. In fact, that's even inscribed on some of his coins. Tom says worship him as Lord. If people resist, and Christians are being taught to resist emperor worship, that's wrong. We don't worship people, we worship God. And so when Christians resisted, they were tortured and then oftentimes put to death. And so this book is really written. I think the key focus of this book is to tell people, don't worship the emperor, hold firm to your faith, and know that in the end, God is going to win. Rome is not going to win. The power of the Roman Empire will not. And it's useful to us, taken out of that context, whenever we're facing whatever we're facing, a pandemic, a crisis, a tragedy in our life. And that seems so powerful. The book of Revelation tells us to hang firm, hold on to our faith, and God will win. Even if Christians were put to death, the writer is saying that's better than giving up your faith and giving up your relationship with Christ. Very quickly, the way this book begins, there's an image of Christ standing among a group of lampstands. Those lampstands represent the churches. There was a message there that says, Christ is with you, churches. Christ is with you. And then we see an image of God on the throne, 24 elders around the throne, 4 living creatures, and then enters the persecuted Lamb who is able to open the seals on the scroll that I mentioned earlier. There's 144,000 people then gathered around the throne. What's the significance of what do the 144,000 represent? Do you recall what those, there's 2 parts of that question. One is, who does it represent? And the other one is, what's significant about 144,000, the number of those who are surrounding the throne? You remember? Who are these people that make up the 144,000? The 12 tribes of Jacob. Yeah, the 12 tribes of Israel with 12,000 people from each tribe. 12, thank you, Greg, 12 times 12 times 1,000, which says this is almost like an infinite number. And these are people who have the mark of God on them. In other words, they have stayed faithful. Now, just whenever we were getting worried about, well, wait a minute, I'm not of the tribe of Israel, 144,000, then the very next verses say there was an infinite number of people standing there, in addition to them, all of whom had been faithful. They came through the tribulation, they kept the faith. So already this vision is encouraging us, keep the faith. We will be part of the company of heaven if we keep our faith. Well, Becky got a phone call. She ran out. I heard her talking to her little grandsons, and now she is back and with us. So are you ready to read?
Yeah.
Chapter 12, verse 1 through 6.
A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days.
Okay, folks, this is written in code. Let's see if we can break the code a bit here. Who's the woman? This woman represents someone, and She represents someone in what Becky just read. And a few verses later, she's going to represent something else. It's kind of like her identity changes. But who do you think she represents when it says that she is going to give birth to a son who will rule the nations? Ah, Mary, the mother of Jesus. Yes, that's who this represents in the early depiction of the woman. And we're going to learn that this dragon is actually Satan. He flicks his tail, and stars are swept from the heavens. It shows his power. And how was the baby Jesus' life threatened? Early in his life, he was threatened. He was threatened with death. Do you remember how that happened? What was the situation where his life was threatened and he had to be saved? Do you recall? It's interesting that account that I'm referring to is given to us in Matthew. It's not mentioned. Yeah, thank you, Pat. It's not mentioned in the Gospel of Luke, but Matthew tells us about King Herod becoming insanely jealous and going to Bethlehem, having the babies that were born, male babies that had been born for 2 years, put to death. And then God, of course, saved Christ, swept him up whenever he ascended into heaven. Some people have said that this image of the dragon chasing the woman is kind of like the gospel in miniature. The woman gave birth to a son. Whenever it says that, the way it's written there in John, it's almost as if you expect it to say she gave birth to a son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and put him in a manger. But it's like the gospel in miniature. We have the birth, and then almost immediately God sweeping him up into heaven with the ascension. Okay, Becky, 7 through 9. Here's where we identify the dragon. So tell me, who's the dragon?
Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Yeah,
Jill's the first one to say, well, it's Satan. I love it in the book of Revelation, whenever they actually break the code for us. And when they do that, it's something that wouldn't, Lucifer, thank you, another name for Satan. It's something that won't hurt the church. The Romans read this and say, okay, so the dragon is Satan. I guarantee you they won't say that about what represents the Roman Empire, which is coming up later. John Milton in the 1600s wrote a classic poem, Paradise Lost. And in it, he talks about how Satan was one of the angels in heaven, got himself into trouble, chose bad angels to align with him, and had this war in heaven and lost, and was tossed out of heaven and lost his paradise. He takes that. He got the basis for that huge poem from here in Revelation 12. Satan is hurled from heaven, but tragically for us, he is hurled to the earth. And oh my goodness, is he mad. He's just lost this major battle. He's furious, so great. Oh, they rejoice in heaven that the accuser is gone, but they say, and woe to the earth. Satan is among us. Okay, Becky, 12, 13 through 17, please. Now, the identity of the identity of the woman is going to change. She no longer represents Mary, the mother of Christ. She represents something else, not a person, but a thing. Okay, Becky?
When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus.
Okay, so who do you think the woman represents now? It's no longer Mary, the mother of Christ. She represents something that is still on earth after Christ has gone into heaven. And her family is described as offspring. She's not a person. Very good. Corin says it's the church and Christians. That's exactly right. This is poetic. The earth doesn't have a mouth to open up and swallow her in. Thanks, Greg. Yes, the church. But it's a description of how God is going to take care of and protect the church for a period. And in the meantime, Satan is pursuing the church. I think Satan is always pursuing the church. And whenever it says, before we saw something that said something would happen for 1,260 days. There's another time tonight, I think it's in tonight's scripture, where we'll see that something would happen for 42 months. That's the same time period. What Becky just read said for a time, times, and a half time. All of those represent 3.5 years. A year, 2 years, and a half year. And it doesn't really mean 1,260 days. It means for a specific period of time. This is numerology. Apocalyptic literature uses numbers in special ways. And when it talks about 42 months or 1,260 days, it's saying the church will be protected for a particular period of time. Not always. At times, the church will be more vulnerable. Even when it's protected, Satan will go after the woman's other offspring, those who have remained faithful. I read this as I was preparing this lesson. I read in the book Breaking the Code by Bruce Metzger. He says, notice how John doesn't promise everything's just going to be hunky-dory. He lets Christians know you are going to be pursued. The church is going to be pursued by Satan. At times you'll be protected, at times you will not. But you have to remain faithful. Becky, you ready to read some more? Okay, 13, 1 through 4.
The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? Okay, we've just been introduced to a new character, a beast coming out of the sea. Very graphic image, all these heads, all these horns, names written on it, a description of one of the heads. Let me ask you, if you were a Roman soldier and you picked this up and you started reading it, or let's say you were someone who were responsible for making sure everybody worships the emperor, and so you're opposed to Christianity. If you picked this up and started reading it,
I'm guessing you wouldn't have gotten through the 7 seals. You would have tossed it down and said, I don't know what this is about, but it has nothing to do with Rome. If you had gotten this far by some miracle, or maybe you flipped a few pages and got to this part about the beast coming out of the sea, would you associate this at all with Rome? I wouldn't. Uh, this is code, and it really is sneaky. The beast that comes out of the sea, uh, with the heads and the horns and all those things, this is the Roman Empire. And who gives the empire its power? You notice that? Which verse is that, Becky, where it says who gives the beast its power? It comes fairly early.
It's verse 4.
Verse 4
Isn't
tells
it?
us.
Yes, yes.
Go ahead and tell us, who does the beast get its power from? The dragon?
People worship the dragon because he had given authority to the beast.
Yeah.
The dragon gave authority to the beast.
Yeah, you guys are giving us the answer. So this is saying the dragon's given power to the beast, and you say, okay, so what is that? Yeah, what John is saying is the Roman Empire gets its power from Satan. It's evil, and so its power comes not from God, but from Satan. This is a bold, courageous work. For someone to write these kinds of things, I mean, John's already on Patmos because of his faith. Now for him to write these kinds of things is really bold. There are some hints about the identity of the beast. On each head there was a blasphemous name. I mentioned earlier that the emperors oftentimes would have their heads engraved on the coins, and inscribed on the coin would say, Caesar, whomever, Domitian, Lord and God. And that's blasphemy. And so John is pointing that out. He is saying, or the Holy Spirit is saying through John, that the Roman Empire is an evil empire. If the beast is the Roman Empire, what would the heads on the beast represent? Okay, so you got this beast coming out of the sea. It's got all these heads. What do they represent? The beast is the Roman Empire. So what are the heads of the Roman Empire? Oh yeah, the Caesars, the emperors. That's exactly right. Verse 3 gives another piece of the code. It says, one of the heads appears to have had a fatal wound. One of the emperors has had a fatal wound, but the wound, even though it was fatal, has been healed. Does anybody remember what happened to the Roman Emperor Nero? Nero was emperor from late 58, 59, somewhere along there to about 65, if I'm remembering correctly. So he was emperor in the early AD 60s. Do you remember how he died? By the way, Nero was mentally unstable. Had this thing about reconstructing Rome. Caused the fire, and then blamed Christians for that, and was really the first emperor to persecute Christians because of their being Christians. Not seeing an answer pop up just yet. Nero committed suicide. He killed himself, and when Domitian became emperor 20 years after Nero's, you're right, suicide. When Domitian became emperor, and after Nero was a number of emperors, Titus, Caligula, I can't remember all of them. Some of them didn't rule for very long, but after several Caesars, in about 80 something, through 95. Along in there was this guy named Domitian. 20 years after Nero, and whenever he came along, people said he's just like Nero. He really insisted on people worshiping him like Nero had done. Emperors in between didn't. And he was even called Nero II, Nero with a Roman numeral 2 after it. And so this is that's what John's talking about here whenever he says one of these heads appeared to have a fatal wound, but it's been healed. He will even at one point say one of the heads had been, quote, resurrected. He's saying that Domitian is like evil Nero number 2. Okay, Becky, 13:5 through 8. And I want you to tell me, as she reads here, be looking for this. How long will the beast, the Roman Empire, be allowed to exercise its authority? My goodness, I see Christy Hall is watching. That's my niece over in Middle Tennessee. Hi, Christy. Good to see you on tonight.
The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God, and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It has given power to wage war against God's holy people, and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world.
Okay, several of you, Greg, Carol, Lynn, have answered the time is 42 months, but it's not really 42 months. Remember, it is 42 months. It's 1,260 days. It's a time, 2 times and a half time. All of that means it's going to rule for a period of time, but not forever. It's a finite period of time. That's what I was referring to earlier when I said later tonight, meaning right then, we're gonna see the 42 months. All of that meaning this is not going to last forever. This was such good news to people that Rome's power will not last forever. When we're being oppressed, when we feel like there's no way out, it just seems like this is going to be forever. And John is saying, actually God is saying through John, this isn't going to last forever. Rome will come to an end. And saying the 42 months is a safe way to say that. So, according to verse 8, all the inhabitants of the earth, everyone, all the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, except, and Becky read this, those whose names are in the Lamb's book of life. That's not talking about predestination. That's talking about people who remain faithful, who hang in there, stay the course, keep their faith. That gets their names written in the Lamb's book of life. The message to the church, to all of us, keep our faith. No matter what's oppressing us, no matter how tough it seems, hang in there. Becky, verses 9 and 10.
Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people.
John saying that reminds me of Jesus. Oftentimes when Jesus was about to say something really, really important, he would say, those who have ears to hear, let them hear. We all have ears, but what Jesus was saying is, if you're interested, if you really want to know this teaching, this truth, listen up. It's important. And John is saying, if you have ears to hear, listen to this. If it's your lot in life to die by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. If it's whatever you are being asked to endure that. but hang firm. It's that point I was making just a minute ago. That's a timeless teaching. So much of the revelation is hung up in the context of the history and what was going on right then. But one of the timeless teachings to us is, you're in this pandemic. Hang in there. You've got this thing hanging over you at work, or you've got this health issue. We have so much that comes at us in life. And God says to us, keep the faith. Whatever it is, you'll be okay because you are with me, and your name will be written on that book of life. Hang on and keep the faith. Now, Becky, we've got a long passage here, 11 through 18. And listen up, folks, because we're going to get the number of the beast.
Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs, it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666.
Oh, there it is, 666, the number of the beast. Okay, now that's referring to the first beast. We've had a dragon. A dragon gives power to the first beast that comes out of the sea. And yeah, 666. And that beast that comes out of the sea with the heads and the horns, that's the Roman Empire. The heads are the emperors. But now here's another beast that's on the land, and it requires people to worship the beast. A lot of scholars say that the second beast is referring to those people who went out into all the provinces, all of the regions of the Roman Empire, and forced people to worship the emperor. It's kind of like the Revelation is addressed to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, and probably in all 7 of those cities. Remember, we read those early on: Ephesus and Pergamon and Smyrna, Laodicea. In each one of those, there would probably be somebody who made sure that that emperor worship was taking place, and they were persecuting and perhaps killing those who didn't. That's the second beast. The 2 beasts and the dragon together, that makes 3. And sometimes they're referred to as the counterfeit trinity, the false trinity, the evil trinity. Those 3 are kind of the central characters of this revelation. I find it interesting that it says that the second beast is deceitful. He has 2 horns like a lamb. The reference there says he almost appears Christ-like, 2 horns like the lamb. Remember the lamb breaking the seal? And yet, he speaks like the dragon, like Satan. So these people who were pushing people to worship the emperor were deceitful. They would make you think it was okay. They would sound very religious, and yet they were speaking for Satan. All right, Becky, if you would read verse 18 again.
This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666.
Okay. You all have probably read different things where people have added up numbers to get 666. The most likely source of that number, and people kind of had this habit in the first century AD. They would take your Greek name and they would put a number. It would be like in alpha was 1, beta was 2, gamma was 3, delta was 4. So A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, if I started adding up the numbers in my name, H, that's letter 8, I believe. A is 1. And so you could add up the numbers for the letters in your name and get a total. The Greek name for Nero, the Greek name was Neron, Neron, Caesar. And if you add up the number of each Greek letter in Neron, Caesar, guess what you get? 666. And so we think that's what John means when he says, have a little wisdom here. This represents the number of a man. And so it looks like he's saying the kind of the epitome of evil. We might say the Antichrist is Neron Caesar, realizing that he's talking about Domitian, this one who's kind of Nero 1 come back to life. It's interesting. Some translations of the Bible, some early manuscripts, I should say, of the Bible, of the Revelation, have the number 616. Others have 666. And if you did not have Neron Caesar, but had Nero Caesar, without that N for the Greek name, it would add up to 616. So there's probably not much doubt that John was referring to Domitian, Nero II. If you and I are being given a cell phone number and it's got 240-3666, we're probably going to say, no, thank you. We've got a thing about that number, don't we? I've seen that number pop up in different places and how people say, what? I don't want that number. But we've come to think of it as an evil number. In numerology, why would 666 be such a bad number? You know, have you thought about that? All of apocalyptic literature, every time you see a number, it has some special meaning. And 666, okay, that's the emperor. But the number 6, remember, we talked a little bit about numerology when we introduced this thing. 7 is the perfect number, right? Complete, perfect. 6 means incomplete, imperfect. So if I got 3 6s, that's like the epitome of imperfect. It is an evil number. So it's sort of a double shot here at Nero. We're about to encounter another set of 7 things. We're not going to hit those tonight. But I want you to notice a pattern. John writes in a beautiful way. The 7 seals. We had 6 seals, and we took a break. We call it an interlude. And then we got the 7th seal. And then we had angels with 7 trumpets. And we had 6 trumpets sound, and then we got a break, an interlude. And then the 7th trumpet. Well, we're about to hit our final set of 7, and you're going to see a pattern in those. Becky, 14:1 through 5. And while she's reading, again, who are the 144,000? These are not just Israelites, children of Israel.
Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven, like the roar of rushing waters, and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless.
Okay, we're getting a little break here before the next series of 7. And Tommy Sutherland has already told us these are believers. Yes, these are people who've remained faithful. They've hung in there. And John has a way of describing them it sounds like he's saying they're sexually pure. He says they haven't defiled themselves with women. He's really not talking about that's not what he's talking about at all. He's talking about this. That's an Old Testament phrase that says they haven't fornicated with foreign gods. And what he's saying is these are people who have not polluted themselves by worshiping the emperor. These people have remained pure, and he refers to them as virgins. Again, the Romans picking this up and reading it would say they'd get such a different view about what he meant. Unfortunately, when we pick it up and read it today, the code is hard to break, and so it's easy to miss his point. But he's saying these are all this huge number, an infinite number of people who have been saved and who have remained faithful. In verses 6 and 7, an angel flies through the air with the gospel to proclaim to the whole earth. In verse 8, it's announced that the beast has fallen. Now, we're going to get more about the fall of the beast. We're going to find out some ways that the beast may fall. But at least there's this announcement that says it's coming. The beast, Rome, is going to fall. Chapters 18 and 19, which we'll read next week, have a lot about that in it. In verses 9 through 12, a third angel appears and declares that anybody who worships the beast, the emperor, will taste God's fury through burning sulfur. Now, what does that sound like? In our 21st century thinking, and it's what the church has taught, burning sulfur. What is that? Some translations say burning brimstone. Brimstone is a form of sulfur. So what are we talking about when we talk about fire and brimstone and sulfur? Sulfur, when it burns a volcano, that produces it, but it's also a way to describe what we think of as hell. Burning brimstone, hellfire and brimstone, right? Okay, Becky, another couple of readings here. 14:13, please.
Then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them."
Okay, now, coming next, if at the end of chapter 14, you see two harvests. One is Christ coming on a cloud with a sharp sickle, and he harvests the grapes of the earth. Christ is reaping the faithful of the earth. Behind him comes an angel on a cloud with a sharp sickle, and he's reaping those who are unfaithful. And I want Becky to read what's going to happen to those who are unfaithful. Christians read and hear these words like this in the book of Revelation, and we go, this is bad. Look what's going to happen. This is not about faithful people. This is about unfaithful. Becky, if you would read that and see if you can think of a song that uses some of this words, 19 and 20.
Just 19, 20. Mm-hmm. The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia.
Oh my goodness. Talk about graphic and gross. Blood rising to the height of a horse's bridle, for that would be the equivalent of 180 miles. That's a lot of blood. Those words were used in the hymn, the battle hymn of the Republic. Listen to one of the lines in that. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. See, it comes right out of that from the Revelation. And this is saying, again, we Christians shouldn't shrink from this and say, oh no, this is going to happen at the end of time. Woe is me. We're supposed to be part of the faithful. And so we have hope. This is saying there's a judgment. There will be a judgment. We won't all be treated the same. Our prayer is that indeed we are counted among the faithful. Now next week we will study 15, 16, 17, and 18. They go together nicely. We're going to have the last series of 7, which is 7 bowls of wrath. And it tells us this is it. This is the last of God's wrath. It will be completed. And that's not the end of the study. We'll have, we've got about 4 chapters left to go after that. And folks, it's about a new heaven and a new earth and good stuff. So if we can make it through next week with the 7 bowls of wrath, I think we've got it made. Been so good to have you all on tonight. I hope that you all have a good night's rest. And I'll pray that tomorrow you have the opportunity to be God's witnesses. Good night.